In this WooCommerce tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a blisteringly fast WooCommerce store. If you've ever suffered from having a really slow, wondering why your WooCommerce store is really slow, this video is for you. Hi, my name is Colin. I'm from CommerceGurus.com, where we provide WooCommerce tutorials and themes to help you build a successful WooCommerce business. If you're new here, consider clicking on the subscribe button for lots more WooCommerce tutorials going forward. Without further ado, let's dive into today's tutorial. Okay, so first of all, I'm assuming that you've got to a point where you've installed WordPress. You can see in front of me here, we have a vanilla installation of WordPress running the 27 WordPress theme. What we're going to do straight away is just go straight into our WordPress dashboard. And today we are going to use a theme from our own selves, our good selves, called Shoptimizer, which is a brand new WooCommerce theme with a specific focus on speed and performance. And we'll have further details about the theme and how much it costs and where you can get it from a little bit towards the end of this video. So for now, I'm going to assume that you've got your hands on Shoptimizer, and we're going to go through the installation process. So we go to upload theme. You'll see once you get the theme that you've got a zip file called shoptimizer.zip. So I'm just going to go ahead, hit the install now button. What will happen now is WordPress will upload the theme and install it onto, we've just installed it there now. It just took a moment or so, and we're going to go ahead and click activate. So Shoptimizer comes with a number of plugins that we use extensively throughout the theme, and the first thing we're going to want to do is install those plugins. There's not too many of them. None of them are required except for the Kirky plugin. So if you really want to trim your installation back and you don't like installing plugins you've never heard of before, there's no problem at all. You can see here Kirky is the only plugin that we essentially deem to be required. Everything else is essentially just recommended. But look, these are all tried and tested plugins. They're all tuned for performance. So, and of course, WooCommerce is going to be required since we're building a WooCommerce store. Let's just go ahead. For now, we're going to click on the bulk task and we're going to click install. And that should only take a moment or two. Most of these plugins, or in fact all of them rather, are coming from the WordPress.org repository. And we're going to go back to we're just going to activate those plugins now. So we've activated all our plugins. Just go back to the dashboard. Sometimes you may see that one of the plugins you've just installed actually starts to take over your dashboard. In fact, for WooCommerce, that's usually the main culprit, but in this example, that's actually quite a good thing. So we'll just go ahead and go through the, why don't I just make something up? Beverly Hills. I cannot spell Beverly. There we go. And let's just complete. You'll want to obviously customize what you're entering here based on your own store's information. So we're going to assume that we're a store based in Beverly Hills. If you choose to allow WooCommerce to track your usage, this is just generic data. It's not in any way tracking you personally. It's quite a useful thing, I think, for the WooCommerce team, just if there are any issues or bugs appearing in your WooCommerce installation, which do happen from time to time. It's no harm. I normally leave that ticked, so let's go. As part of the WooCommerce onboarding process, it'll also prompt you to install a number of payment plugins, Stripe and PayPal being the two most common, hence they're almost always on the screen. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'm also going to activate cash on delivery as a payment option, which will be quite useful for testing a little bit later. And we're not going to use Live Rates. Live Rates is a new service that's offered by WooCommerce, but we don't need that today. And I'm going to leave the old imperial measurements on for our viewers from the United States. I'm going to deactivate these. We don't need these plugins right now. And that's it. We're going to activate Jetpack, but not right now. We'll do that a little bit later. We'll talk about why we use Jetpack and what we use it for. Okay, so WooCommerce is set up. We're going to go ahead to the dashboard. We're not going to install any products manually just right now. And Yeah, we're just going to dismiss the Stripe notice for the moment. Okay, so if I go to the site right now, you'll see it's pretty underwhelming. We don't really have anything set up just yet. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go through and populate our WooCommerce store with some demo data. Of course, if you're an existing WooCommerce store owner and who wants to speed up your store, a lot of what we're going to talk about in this tutorial today is quite relevant to you too. We're obviously assuming here that you're starting fresh. So what I'm going to do is, rather than, we do have built into Shoptimizer, we do have an actual automatic import demo data facility, which will import a lot of pages and posts and widgets and stuff like that. I'm not going to use that right now. I'm actually going to go through the process in a little bit more granular detail, just so you can see actually what's going on when we run that import. And if you've already got a store up and running, doing this stuff manually will allow you to pick and choose what you choose to import. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to Tools and Import, and I've just hit the WordPress Run importer. So this is the native WordPress importer we're going to actually use today. And what I want to do is I want to identify my demo data file. So in this case, I am actually choosing to import demo data here because there's nothing in this store. If you had an existing store, you probably don't want to do this step. What I would recommend in that case is maybe to set up a separate WooCommerce store, a sandbox, a staging site, or just a throwaway installation, and import the demo data so you can actually see what we have done. What I'll do here is, for the purpose of this, I'm actually going to assign it to me, and I'm going to download and import our file attachments. So what's happening right now when I run this is it's importing an XML file of posts and pages that are optimized for Shoptimizer. If you're on really poor quality hosting, one point to note here is it's quite a common point of failure for the importer to not complete. If that is the case, you might want to get in touch with your hosting company and ask them to extend the max execution timeout value for your WordPress website. So our XML import is now complete. What we want to do is we want to go to Settings and Reading. And here we're going to set our store's homepage. Here we just activate the static page option, and from here we're going to choose Home, and for the post page we're going to choose Blog, and we're just going to save changes. Then we're going to head on over just to permalinks once that save option is complete. Did it complete? I'm not sure if it did. Yes, it did. Let's go to permalinks, and we just want to make sure that our post name option is activated. You can see there's quite a lot of different options for WordPress permalinks, which if you've used WordPress before, you're probably familiar with. And in this case, we're just going to use post name, which is the option I would recommend. We're also not going to change any of the native defaults for WooCommerce permalinks. You can also change those from settings permalinks as well. So we're just going to go ahead and save changes. Okay, so now we've got our pages installed. You'll see here when I go back now to our demo site, starting to appear somewhat like a store. You'll see it's not fully like a store just yet, but you can see we now have some demo data installed. The menu is looking a bit strange, so what we're going to do is we're just going to head over to Appearance and Menus, and we're going to assign our primary menu. So you can see here we've imported our menu, and we're just going to assign it here under Menu Settings to Primary Menu. And while I'm here, I'll also assign the secondary menu. So if I hit Select, and if I hit Secondary here and Save, now if I go back, let's have a look. You can see our menu now is looking a lot better. So you can see here straight away we've with very little effort set up our home page on our WooCommerce store. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep powering through. We have a lot to cover here. So next step we're going to do is we're going to import some widgets. So in order to import widgets, we'll just head back over to plugins and install, and we use a plugin called the widget import. Oh, bear with me guys, my keyboard's acting a little bit strange. It's the plugin here. So it's called the Widget Importer and Exporter plugin. Okay, so now once I've installed that plugin, if I go back to Tools, we'll see if we now have a new option here called Widget Importer and Exporter. Click on that, and then what I want to do is choose a file, and you'll find available from the Shoptimizer documentation, you'll see a link to download the WIE file. So it's this WIE file that we're looking to import now. I should have said earlier in the video, of course, that the Shoptimizer demo data XML file is also available from the Shoptimizer documentation page, and you'll find a link to that below. So let's go ahead and import our widgets. And you'll see that only takes a brief moment, and we've imported quite a lot of widgets. And I'm just going to go back to Appearance and Widgets now. I'm just going to reorganize some widgets in our sidebar here. So if you're starting from a clean WordPress installation, you will have probably already had some pre-existing widgets installed in your default sidebar. I'm just going to move up the ones that we've just imported here into that sidebar, just right to the top. You can choose if you wish to leave these here if you want, or you can remove them. I'm going to remove the meta one. I don't think anyone really uses the meta widget anymore. And I'm going to get rid of my categories one, probably get rid of archives as well. Yeah, no need for comments. Recent posts we might leave, and search we'll remove because we're going to be using the WooCommerce search. You can see while we're here, there's quite a lot of other widgets available with the Shoptimizer theme that we're using today. And these widget areas appear in various different parts of the theme. We'll come back to that a little bit later on. Okay, so let's move on with the next step in our tutorial, which is we just want to just double check our WooCommerce pages are set up correctly. So if I go to WooCommerce and I go to Settings and I click on Advanced, you can see yes, we have, as part of our onboarding process into WooCommerce, a cart, checkout, my account page were all automatically created and assigned in our WooCommerce settings area. You can see also in, I believe it may be in general, your shop page should also be set, or is it products? Yes, it's under products. You should make sure that your shop page is also set. So there are three or four pages that are very important that they are set and configured in WooCommerce in order for your store to work correctly. So now what we're going to do is just quickly go back to the shop homepage, and we're just going to see now, just to make sure you can see now, our widgets are now appearing here. You can see toll-free number. A lot of what you'll see in the Shoptimizer theme, we've got some other blog posts on CommerceGurus.com talk about this. A lot of the decisions we've made about what appears where throughout the Shoptimizer theme are based on e-commerce conversion best practices that we have essentially implemented for our clients over the past 15 to 20 years, and really, I suppose, focused in on what works best from a conversion perspective. So yeah, now things are looking a lot more like one would expect. I'll just click on the shop link. You'll see here, perfect. I just want to show you this. If you've already got some pages set up, you may see this -2 thing kick in here. So what's happened there is basically the menu we've imported had a shop page in it, but we already had a shop page set up in WooCommerce. So what we want to do in that particular example is change this link here to go to shop instead of shop 2. So we can go back into our appearance and menus and do that right now. So if I switch back to our primary menu, you can see here, this is the link that I'm referring to. And if I just hover here, yeah, you can see it's referencing shop 2. So what I would like to do is reference our other shop page. And if I just type shop here, you can see we have 2 shop links. And what I'm going to do, I'm not sure which one is which, so I'll just add both of them for the moment. They should have ended up right down at the very bottom of our menu. They did, and if I open this, I can see that this is the one I actually want. This is shop. This will be a copy of the one that's already there, shop-2. So let me remove that one, and let me bring this guy right up to top. of our menu, put that there, and I'm going to remove this one. So now when I hit save and I go back and look at my Zippy store, you'll see our shop page is now linking to the right place. So this is just for anybody who has set up WooCommerce already before they install the theme, which is probably going to be quite a common case. That's something you just might want to do, is to swap out the shop menu with your own menu. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so at this point, let's recap. We've worked from an existing WordPress install. We've installed the Shoptimizer theme. We've imported our XML demo data. We've imported our widgets. Right now, we've got a fully functioning WooCommerce store, but we've not done any performance tuning on it other than installing the Shoptimizer theme. One thing you want to get used to doing if you're concerned about WooCommerce performance is to use this wonderful site called webpagetest.org. There are lots of speed and performance analysis tools available online. WebPageTest is my personal favorite. There's also GTmetrix, which a lot of people have also heard about, and our other very common one is Google's PageSpeed Insights. Of the three that I've just mentioned, WebPageTest, in my opinion, gives you the best results in terms of giving you a forensic analysis of what's actually happening on your WooCommerce store. I would then closely follow it with GTmetrix in terms of both the forensic level that you get and also some additional things that we'll look at. PageSpeed Insights is a funny one because it's the one tool that everybody wants to get 100 out of 100. PageSpeed Insights is a poorly named tool. It's not actually a measure of page speed per se. It's actually a measure of perceived page speed, which is also very, very important. But what you'll see as we talk about this, we get further into this tutorial, it's a bit of a folly to be searching to try and get 100 out of 100 in all cases. It's great if you can get it, but it's not. I would not be hanging your hat on trying to get 100 out of 100 on any modern WooCommerce or any other e-commerce store or any website for that matter. What's more important is to ensure that your store performs as fast as possible, regardless of any particular speed score that you see. For that reason, because PageSpeed doesn't give you a lot of forensic data about what's actually happening on your site, I tend to prefer WebPageTest and GTmetrix for that reason. So what we're going to do now, before we go any further, we're just going to actually run a first baseline test of our store. So just grab the URL and go back to WebPageTest. Sorry, let me just put in HTTPS just to ensure the test runs over our SSL certificate. What we're going to do here is we're going to run our test from Denver, Colorado. You can see there's quite a few different locations that we can run the test from. And the other brilliant thing is these are actual devices. So if you actually want to run, these aren't simulated devices. These are actual physical devices that are wired up to the WebPageTest servers in various different locations. You may wish to choose a data center closest to you physically, or more importantly closest to where your host is physically located, to get some baseline scores. But it would be very important just over time to test from far-flung locations where you may have a sizable customer base. So for example, places like Sydney in Australia are great places to test from. You'll be very surprised, I think, to see how much slower your site renders from those particular locations, especially if your site is hosted, for example, from a data center in the United States. But yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing you could spend hours and hours just testing your store from various different locations. So for now, we're going to assume we're going to use Denver as a good base from which to do our initial tests. You can see here we're using Chrome, and that's what I would recommend for these tests. Our connection we're going to leave as a cable connection, but you can, if you wish, use other connection types here. And another good one to use is the 3G slow, just to see how your site performs on slower 3G connections, which are far more common than you may think. But for now, to get baseline tests, we're going to use cable. If I just skip into Chrome, I'm also going to activate the Lighthouse report, which we're going to use for all our tests today as well, which is my personal favorite of all our tools that we're using for performance analysis, the Lighthouse report, and we'll talk about that maybe in a later video. So right now we're going to go ahead and hit start test, and you'll see, okay, great, we're right at the front of the queue. So quite often, just with day-to-day activity online, you may find that there are a number of tests in front of you, particularly from busier data centers, especially around San Francisco or New York. Hence, Colorado tends to be a little bit quieter, which is a good one. Why it's another good one to use. Hopefully that's the case after this video goes live. You'll see the test. I'm going to sit here for a momentarily and see how long it takes to load. But if you are, don't be surprised if this takes a couple of minutes to run. If you are hitting their servers at a busy time, what I generally find is that it will take, even if things aren't particularly busy, it can take up to 2 minutes for your test to run as the web page test service runs and hits your site. By default, I think it does 2 passes on each test. So what will happen here is eventually this screen will refresh and we'll start to see some data appearing on the screen. So that hasn't happened just yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and pause, and once the test comes back I will resume. Okay, so we're back. Our speed test has completed, and what you'll see straight away when your performance test completes is, okay, some key data, the page you've tested, and here's our scores straight away. So this one is the one we're most concerned about, our first time bite. And this one here, we're also scoring an F on, which is our cache static content. We've got A's out of the box on keep alive, compress, transfer and compress images. But these two in particular are cause for concern, and we're going to talk about those now momentarily. You'll see then beneath that you've got a first view set of times and a repeat view. This one's really, I guess, the one that's most important. But if I drill into details, you'll see a better overall picture of what's going on. So our load time right now is 4.8 seconds, which is, let's face it, not great. And we've purposely gone through this video in this way to show you that the theme and your plugins is just one part of your overall WooCommerce store performance. Of far more importance, quite frankly, is your hosting setup and your caching setup. So here specifically, our load time of nearly 5 seconds. The biggest cause of the biggest bottleneck in our performance right now is right here. Our HTML document is taking 2128 milliseconds to load, so just over 2 seconds for just the HTML for a homepage to load, which is criminally slow. The Zippy shop that we're running here is actually running on a shared hosting platform. Our own servers for CommerceGurus run on our own highly tuned virtual private servers. But for the purpose of this tutorial, we're running on the same kind of shared hosting platforms that quite a lot of you guys will be running. So if you get your hands on any WooCommerce theme, whether it's fast or slow, and your immediate instinct is to blame the theme for speed, that's not the case, folks. Shoptimizer is one of the fastest WooCommerce themes you'll find anywhere. And you'll see even out of the box that while the theme assets are loading quite fast, this guy here, the HTML for the homepage, is loading in the homepage alone is just over 2 seconds. So we're going to fix that momentarily. And the other issue we have here is our static content is not being cached. So what do we do to fix both of those issues? Well, the first thing you want to do is you need a caching plugin. So right now we have absolutely no caching plugins installed. So there are tons of caching plugins. with WooCommerce support. And one in particular that I've found to work very, very well out of the box with minimal configuration is a plugin called Comet Cache. So if I go back to plugins, add new, type Comet Cache, we should see Comet Cache appear here, which we do. I'm going to go ahead and hit install now. And we're going to hit activate. Right, so straight away, a plugin now works. We have one final step we need to complete, which is to enable it. I can tell you from experience that nearly all the defaults that are set up in here are perfect. It's very rare that you need to actually change any of these. Of course, if you choose to, you can. It's worth spending some time to go through and examine what each of the defaults is doing. But as far as I'm concerned, and for the purposes of today, I'm going to leave them exactly as is. There's one other thing I want to do while I'm in here, which is I'm going to switch on Gzip compression. Now, at the server level, on the server that we're testing here today, we already have Gzip compression enabled. Quite a few shared hosts, believe it or not, still at time recording in late 2018, still do not enable Gzip compression on their websites by default. So the two things I would ask you to do after you install and activate Comet Cache is to go to the settings and enable it. And the second thing is to enable Gzip compression and then hit save all changes. Once you do that, your caching is activated. Now, the last thing I do is just open your site in an incognito window or tab. What that does effectively is just a quick warm up of the cache and ensures that you are seeing a cache version of the page when you run your tests on Web Page Tests or GTmetrix or PageSpeed Insights. If you scroll right to the bottom of the page, you should see here Comet Cache is fully functional. You can see the path to the static HTML page that's being loaded when it was cached, etc. Lots of goodies. If you don't see this, if you see there's a problem with Comet Cache, you'll need to dig into the issue a bit deeper. But if you follow everything we've done so far, you shouldn't have any issues. So what I'm going to do straight away, I'm going to go back to Web Page Test, and I'm going to go back to my summary. I'm going to hit rerun this test. And what that will do is just simply run the test again. And again, let's just pause and we'll be back when we get some data coming back in this test. Okay, our test has completed. Now what you'll see straight away is our F for our first time byte has now become an A. And if I drill in to the test in a bit more details, you can see that our first byte time on our homepage has dropped from, what was it, just over 2000 milliseconds last time, so 2 seconds. So it's fallen from 2 seconds to just under half a second. So the caching plugin alone has knocked a 1.5 seconds off our load time. You can see our load time is now down to 3.438 seconds. So we've made a big dent on the load time with the caching plugin alone. One other thing we didn't address, which we'll look at now momentarily, is this guy, the F on the cache static content. We didn't actually get to fix that last time around. One of the reasons why is Comet Cache now actually no longer does that by default. So previously it used to add in that automatically when you enable Gzip compression. It's now available as part of the Pro version. But we also have a little script here, which I'm just going to grab. And this will be in the comments below, in the description of the video below rather. I'm just going to take this particular snippet, I'm going to head back over to my cPanel file manager here, and I'm just opening up the htaccess file for this site, and I am going to drop in this set of instructions. So what I'm doing here is just setting cache expiry dates or timeframes on all the main assets that comprise our homepage. So for things like our CSS, our HTML, GIFs, PNGs, JPEGs, they're looking at either a month or a year. But we're also caching things like PDFs, JavaScript files, etc. So we'll go ahead and save changes on that now. And I head back over to web page test, and we'll just rerun our test again, and let's see what happens. Now what I'll actually do while that's running in the background is I will open up GTmetrix, and I think it's time we actually run our store through GTmetrix. So let's grab the URL and run it through GTmetrix now. So GTmetrix, again, different server regions by default. We're using Vancouver here in Canada, just to give us a different perspective. Again, we're kind of staying in North America. You'll find this test usually runs a little bit faster. One thing I'd recommend is you log in, create an account and log into GTmetrix, and your tests will run a little bit faster. You can see out of the gates here with this test, we are getting a page speed score of 89%, a YSlow score of 77%, and a fully loaded time of 2.7 seconds. Do not be surprised if you see wide variances in the fully loaded time between web page test and GTmetrix. Do not be surprised if you see wide variances in load times in between test runs on both web page test and GTmetrix, meaning I could run the exact same test here now again on GTmetrix and get a completely different load time. And there's lots of reasons why that would be perfectly valid. There could be latency issues on just the general internet between the two, between the test server and GTmetrix and our own hosting. It could just be various different things happening on your store at the time, which might mean that it's loading slower. But even all things being equal, even loaded a fully cached HTML file, I've seen wide variances in the time. What you should be seeing is that you should be seeing, you know, margin of errors of a second or two. You shouldn't be. If it's like 5 or 10 seconds, there's something else going on in my experience. But for example, if I was to run this again, let's run it again actually. So it's 2.7 seconds there on the load time. And let that run in the background. I'll just go back and see, yeah, our test data is starting to pour in here into web page test. And let's have a look back at GTmetrix, see what we get. 3.1. I made no changes there whatsoever, just ran the same test again. You can see we're 400 milliseconds slower this time. In fact, it's loading the exact same HTML document, so nothing has actually changed on the end of the server. So you're going to see variances like this, to be honest with you. The scores you won't see much variance in, because the scores tend to be based on the actual, construction of the page and the build that's there rather than the load time. In the case of GTmetrix here. In the case of web page test, you may see some variance here. If your byte time changes dramatically, that would show up here in terms of dropping from an A to a B or a C or a D or an F. This case may be particularly slow. But again, why these two are valuable is you can dip into the waterfall and see actually what was slow on each load. So you can see here now, on web page test, you can see our F for static content caching is now switched to an A. So we're hitting all A's. The Lighthouse score we'll come back to a little bit later on, but essentially for the purposes of WooCommerce testing, the PWA score isn't that important. So the fact that this is a 54 red, you can almost ignore for the moment. There are some other juicy goodies in here, which is why I've switched this on, intentionally switched this on at the beginning, but we'll come back to those a little bit later. If I drill down now, we can see, so again, 566. So what were we last time? We were just under 500 milliseconds on the previous round. So the variance there is quite small. It's 60, 70 milliseconds. So that's pretty consistent. So you're looking for patterns of consistency between test rounds. While you may see overall variances in the load score, you should really be getting to know the waterfall, what's in your site, and understanding what's, what is causing a bottleneck, what can you remove, what can you make faster, and really drilling in at that level. And okay, so let's move on to our next step. So next up, we're going to add in another plugin that will help us improve our load time even further. And that plugin is called Autoptimize, which is, in my opinion, one of the single best plugins you can use on any WooCommerce or WordPress site to help speed up the perceived performance of your site. So you'll get it from plugins, add new, type Autoptimize, and click install as usual and activate. Once this plugin activates, you'll find its settings live under settings Autoptimize. So it's not as straightforward to switch on with this plugin. There are a few settings we need to tweak and tune for optimal performance. First thing I'm going to suggest you do before you do anything here is show advanced settings. So we're going to optimize straight away our HTML. What that does just removes a lot of white space and tries to minify your HTML a little bit. Choose to keep HTML comments if you wish. I don't. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to optimize our JavaScript. So what we want to do here is a couple of different little settings that we need to tweak. Autoptimize has a number of different ways in which JavaScript can be loaded on your site. JavaScript and the way in which it loads is one of the most frustrating challenges that any WordPress and WooCommerce store owner face, particularly when it comes to things like PageSpeed Insights. In fact, we haven't run a PageSpeed Insights test here, so just while we're looking at before we do our JS configuration, let me just run one now. And while that's running, I'll just come back and talk a little bit more about Autoptimize. So JavaScript is a huge source of problems when it comes to performance optimization on the web, on the modern web in 2018 and beyond. So, and the biggest reason for that is modern sites are becoming more and more reliant on JavaScript for everything. And JavaScripts like jQuery, for example, by default are render blocking. What does that mean? Render blocking simply means that the script loads early in the rendering process of how the web page is built on your device. So, for example, if you're loading jQuery, which is a reasonably big file, a lot of the interactivity things that happen on your web page cannot happen until the jQuery script is loaded. And that really goes against modern performance principles and best practices, which say they should not be render blocking. They should be loaded asynchronously, meaning the web page loads and then your scripts are added after the fact. The challenge with WordPress and WooCommerce in particular is that while WordPress by default loads jQuery in a render blocking manner. So in order to change that, if you change it to be non-render blocking, WordPress itself and many of the core plugins and add-ons that are out there may break, and quite often do break. So while it's the easiest thing in the world to use a plugin like Autoptimize and using the settings that appear here to make them non-blocking, quite often your site will break. So therefore, you'll see, which is a long story short, to say, well, why are these scripts excluded by default? That's why, basically, if these scripts weren't excluded, your WordPress site or your WooCommerce site could very easily break. So what it means, though, is when you go and look at our page speed score here is quite low because we haven't yet tuned Autoptimize. What you'll find here when you go in is that eliminate render blocking JavaScript and CSS above the full content, and lo and behold, here we have jQuery and jQuery migrate. So they're the main render blocking elements that are killing us at the moment. On desktop, you'll see things are slightly better, higher score, but the render blocking is still an issue. And on the CSS side of the house, render blocking is also an issue. And you'll see here we have quite a few CSS files. Most of these are coming from various different plugins that we have installed. So a best practice for performance optimization used to be to concatenate, which is to say combine all your CSS files into a single file, and then minify them, which basically gets rid of all the white space in the file. With HTTP2, that's kind of changing now with the way the HTTP2 protocol works. Having lots of smaller files can actually help your page to load faster. In my experience, that is I suppose, is something that's highly dependent on how well your server is configured and your hosting company works. So for the time being, I am still recommending that people will minify and concatenate their CSS files. HTTP2 isn't it's probably upwards of around 20-30% of the web running at HTTP2 right now, but it's still not the prevailing standard. So again, this step may differ depending on where you're hosted, but for now, let's assume you're still using HTTP 1.1, in which case combining your files and minifying them is the best advice. So let's go ahead. We're going to optimize our JavaScript code. We're not going to load it in the head. We're not going to inline. We're not going to aggregate our inline JavaScript, but what we are going to do is we're going to leave these exclusions, and we're going to add a few more of our own based on Shoptimizer's best settings. So you can see here, actually, we're just adding in one more, which is a font loader that's used to load Google fonts. Just want to exclude that. And for our CSS options, we're going to add a few additional options. Let me just take that script. Again, this will be in the description below. So I'm going to add this into the exclude. And you can see our additional files are here, which is the main Shoptimizer CSS file. The reason we're excluding this guy in particular, this file is already optimized, as is the minified version. So you don't need to minify that file again. So let's go back here. So if we exclude the scripts we need to exclude, we can leave this off. We're going to aggregate inline CSS, inline and defer CSS. Yes. Now, what's going on here? So inline above the fold CSS while loading the main optimized CSS only after page load. So if you weren't using Shoptimizer, if you were just using Storefront or some other WooCommerce theme that hasn't been tuned for performance, one of the things that you'd have to do for performance best practices is generate what's called the above the fold CSS. And what is that? The above the fold CSS is essentially just the minimal amount of CSS that's required to load the portion of your web page that appears on the screen in front of you without scrolling, right? So that will be different on different devices. On a desktop, obviously, you'll see more of the screen than you would on a smartphone device. And it can be quite tricky to figure out what the above the fold CSS is. There are a number of different tools, which we may look at in some other videos at another point in time, which can help you generate the above the fold CSS. Shoptimizer, its default CSS, which is on the theme, already has the above the fold CSS figured out for you. So you don't need to paste anything here. So while you're going to activate this, the reason you're activating this is to ensure that the other CSS file that comes in Shoptimizer is loaded in a non-blocking manner. So it may seem strange to tick this box and then put nothing in here, but that's the absolute right thing to do for our particular example here. In times gone by, inlining all your CSS onto the page was a good idea if you didn't have that many pages on your site, but we don't need to do that anymore, so we'll just leave that off. And what else have we got that we want to do here? Yeah, you can leave all these other defaults as is, so I'm just going to save those changes and empty the cache. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just go into Extra while I'm here. Autoptimize gives us a quick way of removing WordPress emojis, which are a great idea because it adds in a couple of different HTTP requests that you don't really need. We're only sacrificing emojis, not the end of the world. If you're partial to your WordPress emojis, you can leave that one unchecked. And the final one we're going to do is we're going to add in a series of hosts that we want to use the default Autoptimize pre-connect feature, which again, what basically pre-connect does is any URLs, and they must be full URLs including the HTTP or HTTPS protocol. Nearly everybody should be HTTPS these days. What happens with the pre-connect protocol is that any of the URLs that we enter here, once the web page, once the initial connection is loaded and the HTML is parsed, if your browser finds any other host names in here, it'll connect to those host names while it's loading the rest of the page, even before it gets to any of the assets that you're calling from those destinations. And what that does is it saves a huge amount of time, particularly with HTTPS, where your browser needs to conduct a handshake with that server. And all those encryption handshakes can happen in parallel while the rest of the page is loading. So if you've quite a lot of external calls to places like WP.com, which we'll be using very, very shortly, or the Google APIs, which we might be using for maps or fonts, this can actually save quite a lot of time, in my experience, upwards of a second in some cases, particularly if you've got slow third-party scripts. So that's a really, really useful one to add in, and one that not a lot of people will actually do. So Autoptimize gives us that. I mean, there's other ways of doing it, but it's there, so why wouldn't we fill it out? Be mad not to. Okay, so we've just to recap what we've done there now, we've switched on Optimize. We've optimized our HTML by default. We're optimizing our JavaScript. We are not inlining anything. We're excluding several key scripts which we need to exclude to ensure our site doesn't break. With CSS, we are optimizing, but we are going to inline and defer nothing because the theme itself is deferring, and we're excluding some of those files that are already minified and optimized. And that should be that in terms of optimized. So it's going to, for paranoia, I'm just going to empty our cache again one more time. Because what happens is Autoptimize, when that runs, will now take all those individual CSS and JavaScript files and create one single CSS and one single JavaScript file, obviously exclusions notwithstanding. And Comet Cache will automatically get its cache cleared when Autoptimize's cache is cleared, if that makes sense. But again, just for paranoia, I always go ahead and just clear the cache again myself. And the last thing I do is I'll just warm up the cache by opening the site in a incognito tab. And if I just go and check the source now, you'll see that our source is now compressed, right? You can see there's no white space in there. That's Autoptimize in action and compressing the markup down as much as possible. You'll see Comet Cache has retained its footprint there, so that's useful. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go back to web page test, and we're going to rerun our test again. So let's go there and hit rerun. And we'll be back when we get some data coming into this test. Okay, so we're back with our fresh test result, and you can see now some interesting things have happened on this test run. So we've just completed our Autoptimize configuration. If I go into the details of the page now, you'll notice some very interesting things. First of all, look how short our waterfall is now. So we've actually, this is the real benefits of Autoptimize in terms of what it's done. So all those individual CSS files that we had previously are now wrapped up into this one CSS file here. You'll see there are a few other CSS files, but there are exceptions. So I'll just close that again. You can see main.min is one of our exceptions at the moment. If I go down to our JS file here, our JavaScript file here is concatenated and minified. Just to show you, if I was to open up that file, what you'd actually see inside of it looks like this. Okay, so you can see here all the JavaScripts that are coming from our various different plugins. Autoptimize has scooped them all up, and instead of them loading as individual files, it has squashed them all into a single file. And you can see this dramatically reduced the size of our waterfall. Word of caution, just if you're debugging your WooCommerce store and you're trying to figure out what are the biggest, slowest individual CSS and JavaScript files that are loading on your site, it's worth switching Autoptimize off and running it through the web page test waterfall so you can actually see which are the biggest files individually. So one downside of now having all those files minified is I can't really see what are my slowest files. So if I wanted to go back and do some further tuning and tweaking and removing some individual CSS and JavaScript files from my store homepage, I'd actually switch it off, identify what those are, and either get rid of those plugins or use some other methods and means to remove those any of the assets that I didn't need to load on that page. You can also see here here's the pre-connect happening here. So for the gstatic subdomain where Google Fonts are loaded from, the font actually only gets called here at whatever that point is, 1.3 seconds. But the actual pre-connect step happens here. Now previously what happened was this little guy, this little blue bar would have been shunted right up behind him like it is on these ones here. These are loaded from our own domain, which is why they're loaded there. And that would have pushed this waterfall right over. So we're saving ourselves a good half a second there alone on that particular optimization that we've introduced. So you can see now our load time's looking far better. We're down to 2.6 seconds for the load time. One thing we've really not got into in this video, but one of the more meaningful numbers you should really be looking at here is the first paint time here, the run first paint time, and your DOM content loaded. Quite often you'll see on bigger sites, like if you go look at Amazon, their run first paint time, their DOM content load time are quite low, but their overall load time can sometimes be upwards of 20-30 seconds. And these are the numbers that are far more meaningful in terms of perceived load time. So they're far more indicative of what's actually happening on the screen than the load time. Now obviously you'd want all your numbers to be as low as possible, but the real ones that are of critical importance initially are here when you're looking at web page test. What I'm going to do is just going to go back over to GTmetrix and rerun our test over there and see how we're performing now. So this was the test we previously were at 89, 3.1 seconds, and 70 were individual HTTP requests. Let's see what we're at now. And voila, that's for the hell of it. Just also rerun our PageSpeed Insight test. And you can remember previously our scores there were 43 on mobile and 77 on desktop. So let's see what we're coming at now. So we've had a big jump of 30 odd points on mobile from what was it? We were 40, I just said it, I know, 43, and we're now 74. On desktop we're at 88 and we were previously 77. So that's a good sizable jump on both counts. So again, you'll see our render blocking is still an issue because we're making the choice to keep jQuery in a blocking manner. But look, that's a big jump. Let's go look. So GTmetrix before was 89, 3.1 seconds, 70 requests, 956 kilobytes. We are now at 95, 88, 2.5 seconds, and 848 kilobytes. The requests, a big chunk. We've really done some good sizable reduction there in terms of number of requests. We're down 40 requests. So that's really the power of Autoptimize there. In action. You'll see again if you go to the waterfall, which this is the equivalent to what you'll see on web page tests. So both services provide a good waterfall. Again, I have a preference for this guy just for using it for years and years. But the waterfall, I have to admit, over in GTmetrix is getting pretty good too. So yeah, choose your poison. They're both pretty good. Now, one last thing we're going to do to complete our scoring over here is you can see here effective use of CDN's got a big X. Now CDNs, CDNs have the default advice from pretty much all WooCommerce and WordPress optimization tutorials is that you must have a CDN. You do not need a CDN, particularly if most of your traffic is located close to where your server is physically located. So for example, if your customers are 95% based on the East Coast of the United States and your server is located on the East Coast of the United States, CDNs can sometimes actually slow down the performance of your site, particularly if the CDN's endpoint is further away than your hosting company. So I don't buy into the mantra that you must always have a CDN. However, where CDNs are really useful and very effective is if you're a global business and you have, for example, lots of customers in far-flung locations like Australia and your server is hosted in the United States, CDNs are a godsend. They will help you massively when it comes to load time simply by reducing latency. They're getting your assets closer to the end customer. So you really have to, what I would advise is test your site with and without a CDN, and going back to those locations that we were using on web page test at the beginning, you can really see the impact on having a CDN from various locations around the world. So don't just accept the conventional wisdom about CDNs, particularly as they're yet another cost generally. Okay, Cloudflare, there's a free plan, which is cool, and we're going to look at another one now, which is also free in Jetpack. But I would always just caution on CDNs by just saying you absolutely need one. You might be surprised to find that your site sometimes performs faster. So yeah, give it a good test. So in this case, we're going to assume that we're a global operation and we need a CDN because we have lots of customers and God knows where. So let's go back to our WordPress. We can find it. There we go. And we're going to install Jetpack now. So head back into plugins. You can see Jetpack is here. Don't have to go looking for it. Surprise, surprise. I'm going to install, activate. And we're not just going to, we will actually set up here. So Jetpack, because it requires a WordPress.com account, you'll probably get something like this. Okay, so I'm already logged in. I'm just going to go ahead and hit approve. If you've never used WordPress.com, you'll probably need to create an account at this step. So once this handshake happens between Jetpack and our Zippy shop, we should be sent back to our shop and we can finish off setting up Jetpack. Jetpack has a bit of a, we want to just start with free for now, but I would always consider paying for Jetpack if you need things like backups and malware. It's invaluable from that perspective. Jetpack has somewhat of a checkered reputation where people swear by it that it's slow. I don't really buy into that either, to be honest with you. I mean, it does a lot of things for sure. It's a pretty well coded plugin at this point, and it's invaluable for things like a free CDN, which is what we're going to use it for. So we're going to go into settings in Jetpack, and we're going to go down to performance and speed, and we're going to hit serve images from our global CDN, number 1. And what that will do, without any other work, is it'll switch on a CDN for your site for free, and you don't need to do any further configurations. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to enable lazy loading of images. So what that basically means is that when your web page loads, the only images that will actually be loaded on the initial load will be anything within the current screen real estate of your device. So what that means is everything else that's further down below the fold, as it's called, on your page will not be loaded until you scroll, they come into view. So that can generate huge savings in terms of both the number of HTTP requests for your page, but also then in the load time, given that images along with JavaScript tend to be the things that weigh the most in terms of heavy web pages. So yeah, we'll just switch both of those on, and that's it. We've nothing else to do here. I'll just double check Jetpack hasn't tried to sneak any other functionality in. No, I would, while I'm not as critical as Jetpack as some others, I would just keep an eye on it in terms of what it tries to do on your site, that's for sure. But definitely don't be put off by people saying that it's too heavy. It's not. So we're going to go back now, and what I'll do is I'll just clear. So 2 things I want to do. I'm going to clear the Comet Cache, and what I'll also do while I'm here is I'll delete the Autoptimize cache. Again, I probably don't need to do both. Once I clear Autoptimize, it'll also clear Comet Cache, but old habits die hard. Did I clear that? Yeah, I think I did. Yeah, okay. And again, I'll just finally warm up the cache, and I can actually just quickly check and make sure that my images are being loaded from yeah, I can see here. You'll notice that your file extensions will have changed from your domain zippyshop.commercegurus.com in this example to now being, i2, i1, w.wp.com, etc. Yeah, okay, so it's working, so which is cool. And what I want to do now is I'm going to go back to web page test. I'm going to rerun a test again. That's for, where we go? Sorry, we were here. Yeah, so let's run it again. And we'll be back once we get some data coming back into this test. Okay, so we're back with our next web page test. So some interesting things have happened on this test. So our last test, if you remember, was here, and you can see our load time back then was 2.609 seconds, so not too shabby. Our load time here has actually gone out to 2.7 seconds, right? So it's 170 milliseconds. It's not the end of the world, but it just goes to show that a CDN is not the be-all and end-all. You'll also notice, I would, sorry, just got distracted there for a moment. If you look here, this is the real value. You'll see that our bytes in are, so the size of the page is now 693 kilobytes. It was previously 840 kilobytes. So we've knocked off 200 and what do we got? Sorry, I said it again. Yeah, so it's 150 kilobytes or so, which is not too shabby, not to be sniffed at. And you can also see that our run first paint time is down by 300 milliseconds here as well. And that, frankly, is a more valuable indicator of perceived load time than the overall page load time. Our start render time has fallen as well, 1.8 seconds. Our first byte is down slowly. So again, the overall load time, if you look at it and you go, oh, after doing all that work and it's now my page is slower. Don't focus on the overall load time. Take a full holistic view of everything that's going on in your scores and understand what these numbers mean, because they're really, really important. And I wouldn't be disheartened. I'm really happy with the fact that we've knocked off this amount. I'm really happy with the fact that these net numbers are better than they were. For me, this is a good result, and it's probably some of it, to be honest with you, is just slight variances in terms of the performance even of the hosting, the data center that we're running the test from. Lots of different variables. Okay, so I'm going to do one. We're on the home straight now at this point. One last thing we're going to do is look at the size of some of these images. So in the waterfall here, you can see now that most of our images are actually no longer rendered, which is interesting. So that's down to the lazy loading that we're using with Jetpack, and yeah, that helps massively, obviously, in terms of the perceived load time here for your users. We're going to install, to conclude our optimization setup tutorial for today, we're going to install one final plugin for the remaining images that haven't been removed from the waterfall, and it's called WP Smush. This plugin's name has changed recently, so let's see if WP Smush will still find it. Nope. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, Smush Image Compression and Optimization. This plugin's been around quite a long time. Fell into a state of neglect, and the good folks over at WPMU picked it up and give it a new lease of life. And it's definitely one of the best plugins out there for just optimizing the images on your store. So yeah, we go through the setup process. We want to automatically smush images on load. Stripping image metadata will help if that's important to you. Obviously, you don't want to do it. We can resize the full-size images if you wish. Let's go ahead and do that. And yeah, we're going to go for 1024 by 1024. And we don't need Smush in Gutenberg just yet, as of the time of recording. WordPress 5 has not yet appeared. So let's bulk smush. So this may take a few minutes to run, depending on the number of images that are on your site, depending on the performance of your hosting platform. Don't be surprised if this takes quite some time to run, but it's a well-coded plugin, so it should be able to handle running for a decent amount of time. can see here we're getting through the process pretty quick. The smush is done, and we've knocked about a meg, 954 kilobytes off and size of our media library. So not a huge amount, but nevertheless, we had pretty good optimized images in our demo data as it was. But you can still see, I mean, every kilobyte counts essentially. So let's just clear our cache again, warm it up. And once it's warm, let's give web page test another final test. Just while that new test is running, let's just go back and check how GT metrics looks now. And for the hell of it, let's run through PageSpeed as well. Okay, so we're holding steady at 97, which is great. What you'll see though is one of the previous issues we had here was about using scaled images. So that error has gone away, which is great. Our load time is within an acceptable variance, 2.7 seconds. Size is now pretty good, 698, 32 requests. So overall, we're looking pretty good now. I mean, this is on a shared hosting platform. You know, it's a lot of the time you'll see these wonderful tutorials about making WooCommerce really, really fast. And you'll end up with a store that has a very bare bones homepage and no page builders. Shoptimizer is currently being used here. You know, you can see we've got big hero images. We've got images here on each one of these guys. Okay, these are all placeholders, but they're still, you know, representative of image shots. So this is a full-featured, you know, e-commerce homepage. We're not skimping in terms of functionality to hit our scores. Which makes the numbers all the more impressive. You can see here as well, we're up to now into the 90s on desktop, and we are, you know, hitting high 70s on mobile. So, you know, we're getting there on those. Let's go back and look at our web page test, and just let that finish now. You can see here data is populating. It's not quite done. Let's go back. One more thing I want to show you. And let's see what report this is. So in test history. This is a really, really useful thing here. Once you, web page test keeps a full history of all your scores. So this allows you to go back and do comparisons and checks. I want to go in and show you Lighthouse, which I mentioned earlier on. Lighthouse is a project from Google, which for me is probably the best, most meaningful tool for evaluating the performance of your WooCommerce store today. And what you'll see here now is that our progressive web app score, which is the one that's shown to you in web page test, is here. But the one we're interested in is this guy, our performance score. And see, we're hitting a score of 75. Some of these other scores are interesting, but they're beyond scope of this tutorial today. But if we just look at the 75 and what else we've got going on here. First contentful paint and first meaningful paint are probably the two most useful indicators of real perceived performance that we have anywhere on the web today. And okay, so we can see here that we're looking at about 3.5 seconds for our meaningful paint time. What that basically means is that that's the first time some actual meaningful content appears on the screen. So what our report on web page test shows is a fairly commonly accepted standard run first paint time 1.4. That sounds great. That sounds fantastic. Our actual Lighthouse is showing us a number which is effectively defined from Google itself, doesn't really exist anywhere else just yet. This meaningful paint and the contentful paint numbers are metrics that are essentially determined by Lighthouse to be when things actually start happening on the page of use to the user. So while your run first paint is 1.4, and that sounds great, at that point in time, the user may not be able to do anything on the screen. Whereas back in Lighthouse, at this point they'll be able to read the page properly, for example. At this point here, the time to interactive is the first time they can actually do things on the screen. Add to cart, buy, actually interact with the elements that appear on your screen. So if you really want to get technical, that's the most valuable number that's available in this report, because that's a really, really good indicator. Now, what you'll find is, okay, so we're looking at 5,000, so just over 5 seconds. Sounds like a long time. What I found is from web page test, from some data centers, you'll see that their Lighthouse scores seem very, very long. Like I can run this test from another data center and probably see a completely different score. So what I tend to do is I run Lighthouse from our own data centers, and we see much lower scores. But again, it's worth testing these from different locations. But again, not to read just all into the numbers that you'll see. If you scroll down, you'll see again render blocking here showing up, but whereas PageSpeed just gives you, some data here, some loose kind of instructions. Lighthouse actually delves in, tells you what your estimated savings would be and what the individual files are that are causing those issues and the download time for them. So it's far more meaningful data here, and you can see some additional tips that it's giving us in terms of further optimizations that we can make. Now, at this point, this is the other problem with WooCommerce optimization, is it's diminishing returns at this point. What we're talking about at this point is 20 kilobytes here, 16 kilobytes here. We're talking very small marginal savings at this point. So we wouldn't delve into it. Wouldn't be worth more of our time right at this moment in time doing it. The DOM here is being declared as being excessive. 1,162 nodes. Yeah, I mean, there could be other work that we could do at this point to remove some elementary elements from the page that would help that. All our other indicators are okay here, and that's something we come back to in a further tutorial. We actually ship a separate, lighter homepage with Shoptimizer, which doesn't have excessive DOM nodes, which is here home minimal, and that's another way of speeding up your homepage further. But at this point, you're down to, I suppose, what, like all things with performance, is compromises. What can you compromise on and what can't you compromise on? So you'd have to make decisions about what elements you might need to remove from the page, etc. But at this point, we're looking pretty good. Again, we're on if I was to move this site, zippyshop.commercegurus.com, onto a faster server, we'd see those numbers probably jump up as well. A Lighthouse score would certainly be up in the 90s, if not 100, which is what it hits from our own servers right now. And just to go back and look at that last test that we ran, because that Lighthouse score was for an older test, you can see here, okay, so now our load time is 2.9. So again, yeah, we're within a margin of error from what we were previously, around 2.7 seconds. 1.5. You can see our file size is still around 693. So Smush hasn't helped us massively with these images, maybe slightly, but it's pretty. It's looking pretty good now. The last thing we'd look at, if we had time beyond this tutorial, will be our get refresh fragments. Is quite long. It's the single biggest bottleneck we have on our site now. The load time ends here, so it's probably costing us about half a second, and that's something we'll come back to in another video as to what that is, what it means, and how you can make it faster. But in short, it's it's the only other thing that's on our homepage now. It's not cacheable, because it's how our cart gets loaded. And here you can see the effects of a poor quality shared host that's taking almost 1.2 seconds to load in of itself, because this hits the database, whereas nothing else here does now at this point. And let's just run a final test on GTmetrix and see if we've got any other mileage there to get. Probably not. I would imagine at this point we've tapped out all the low-hanging fruit that we can achieve on this shared host. Yeah, 97. It's probably minor shavings on that. Yeah, okay. So at this point, we have our store, our WooCommerce store loading in around just under 3 seconds with a full featured hero image and lots of images on the page. So it is possible to get WooCommerce tuned and running in a very fast manner while maintaining lots of big images on the page. You just need to know how to do it. So I hope this video has been useful and you've got some value out of it from that perspective. If you did find it valuable, feel free to hit the thumbs up button, and of course if you haven't subscribed already to our channel, feel free to do so. There'll be lots more WooCommerce tutorials coming soon, delving into other aspects of WooCommerce performance. If you have any questions on any of the things that we've covered in today's tutorial, feel free to leave a comment below. We'll get back to you in the comments. And if you want to get your hands on the Shoptimizer theme, head on over to CommerceGurus.com/Shoptimizer, where you'll see the full details for the theme. It's currently available. The full retail price is $99. There are some coupon codes available though, especially for our YouTube audience. So if you subscribe to our channel, drop us a note in the comments and we will send you instructions for how to get a 50% off discount code for Shoptimizer. And yeah, okay, so that's it for today. Talk to you soon.